The structure swayed 30 feet above the ground, steel groaning against the wind as three men clung to scaffolding that shouldn't have been there in the first place. Daniel Hayes had warned them. 6 weeks ago, in a conference room that smelled like expensive coffee he couldn't afford, he'd stood before people who earned more in a month than he'd see in 5 years and told them the truth. The foundation was compromised, the permits were forged, and someone was going to die. They'd laughed. Then they'd fired him. Now, as rain hammered down and metal screamed, he was the only one who knew how to stop it from collapsing completely, and the only one they wouldn't listen to until it was already too late. If you're watching this story unfold, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. Now let's go back to where it all started, 6 weeks before the storm, when Daniel Hayes was just another invisible man in steel-toed boots. Daniel Hayes stood in the supply yard at 6:47 a.m., checking inventory sheets that never quite matched what was actually on site. The numbers were off again. Not by much, 3 pallets of rebar instead of 5, concrete mix dated 2 weeks older than the delivery manifest claimed, but enough that he'd started keeping his own count in a worn notebook that lived in his back pocket. He didn't mention it to anyone. Not yet. "Hayes!" Marcus Webb's voice cut across the yard, sharp enough to make the newer workers flinch. Marcus was the kind of supervisor who thought volume equaled authority, a man who'd climbed exactly 1 rung higher than Daniel and acted like he owned the ladder. "You done standing around, or are you planning to actually work today?" Daniel looked up from his clipboard. "Inventory's off again." "Yeah, well, inventory's not your job. Your job is making sure Crew 3 gets their materials loaded before 7:30. Think you can handle that? Or should I find someone who can?" The younger guys on the crew went quiet, watching. This was how Marcus operated. Public humiliation as management strategy. Daniel had worked for Whitmore Development for 6 years, long enough to know which battles mattered. "I'll handle it," he said. Marcus grunted and walked away, already yelling at someone else. Daniel went back to his checklist, but his jaw was tight. The inventory discrepancies had been happening for 3 months now. Small enough to overlook, consistent enough to be deliberate. He'd mentioned it to his direct supervisor once, casually, and been told that warehouse accounting wasn't his concern. The message was clear: stay in your lane. So he did, most days. By 8:15, Daniel was on site at the Meridian Tower project, Whitmore Development's flagship luxury high-rise, the kind of building that came with glossy brochures full of words like prestigious and uncompromising quality. 18 stories of glass and steel rising in the heart of the financial district, each unit starting at $3 million. Daniel had helped break ground on it 14 months ago. He knew every pore, every beam, every corner that had been cut when timelines got tight. And he knew, deep in his gut, where years of construction work had built an instinct sharper than any engineering report, that something about this project was wrong. "Yo, Danny!" Rico Santos jogged over, hard hat slightly crooked, grinning like he always did. Rico was 24, all energy and optimism, the kind of kid who still believed hard work got rewarded. "You see the CEOs coming through today?" "Yeah, I saw the memo. Claire Whitmore herself, man. Ice Queen's doing a walkthrough." Rico whistled low. $10 says she doesn't make it past the lobby without her heels getting stuck in something. Daniel almost smiled. Almost. "She's not stupid, Rico. She'll wear different shoes." "You ever seen her up close?" "No, and I'm not planning to." That was true. In 6 years at Whitmore Development, Daniel had never been in the same room as Claire Whitmore. She was 3 organizational layers above him, might as well have been on another planet. He'd seen her face in company emails and trade magazines. Sharp features, dark hair always pulled back, the kind of expression that made you double-check your work even in a photograph. The rumor mill said she was brilliant, said she'd turned her father's mid-tier development firm into a major player in 5 years. Said she had a reputation for being ruthlessly efficient, for cutting through bureaucracy like a blade through silk, for firing executives who couldn't keep up with her standards. They also said she was cold, that she'd once made a project manager cry during a budget review, that she'd never been seen at a company social event, never smiled in a photograph, never showed anything resembling human warmth. Daniel didn't care about any of that. He cared about going home to his son every night, about keeping his health insurance active, about not giving anyone a reason to look at him too closely. Invisibility was a survival strategy. "Well, I'm going to try to get a look," Rico said. Maybe she'll notice me, offer me a promotion or something. Or maybe you should focus on not dropping anything expensive while she's here. Rico laughed and headed back to work. Daniel checked his watch, 9:20 a.m. His shift supervisor wanted the framework inspection on level 12 completed before lunch. Routine work, the kind he could do in his sleep. He took the construction elevator up, the metal cage rattling as it climbed. At level 12, the skeleton of the building opened up. Concrete floors, exposed steel beams, the city spreading out beyond the safety netting. It was quiet up here, just the wind and the distant sound of work below. Daniel walked the perimeter, checking welds, noting bolt tensions, running his hands along joints the way another man might read Braille. This was the part of the job he actually liked, the tactile certainty of it, the way metal and concrete didn't lie. They either held or they didn't. Halfway through his inspection, he stopped. There was a crack in the concrete near the northeast support column, hairline barely visible, but running at an angle that made his stomach drop. He crouched, traced it with his fingers. It shouldn't be there. The concrete was less than 4 months old, rated for loads twice what this floor would carry. He pulled out his phone, took 3 photos from different angles, then stood and looked around. The support columns on this level were supposed to be reinforced with specific rebar configurations. He'd seen the plans. He'd watched some of them go in. He walked to the nearest column, examined the exposed sections where formwork had been removed. The rebar was wrong, not catastrophically wrong, not the kind of thing that would make the building collapse tomorrow, but wrong enough that under sustained load, over time, with the weight of 17 more floors above it, the tolerances would be tighter than they should be. Wrong enough that in a seismic event, or under certain wind conditions, the structure might behave unpredictably. Wrong enough that someone had made a decision to save money at the expense of safety margins. Daniel stood there for a long time, phone in hand, looking at the photos he'd just taken. He could report this, fill out the proper forms, send them up the chain, let the engineers and inspectors do their jobs. He'd done that before, on smaller issues. Sometimes it got fixed. Sometimes it got ignored. Sometimes it got him a reputation as a troublemaker, the kind of guy who slowed down projects by being too careful. But this was different. This was the flagship project. This was 18 stories of luxury units that would house hundreds of people. This was the building that would define Whitmore Development's reputation for the next decade. This was the kind of problem that could kill someone. Daniel put his phone away and finished his inspection. He made notes in his supervisor report, careful, factual, documented. Then he went down to level 8, where the site office was set up and printed 3 copies. One for his supervisor, one for the project safety file, one for himself. By the time he was done, it was nearly 11, and the word had spread that Claire Whitmore's convoy had just pulled into the site entrance. Daniel avoided the crowd. He had work to do, and he'd learned long ago that men like him, men in worn jeans and company-issued hard hats, men who drove 15-year-old trucks and couldn't remember the last time they'd bought new boots, didn't belong in the same orbit as people like Claire Whitmore. He was back on level 12, double-checking measurements, when he heard voices below. The executive tour. He could make out Marcus Webb's voice, louder than necessary, clearly performing for an audience. Daniel kept working. He had about 45 minutes left on his inspection, then he needed to file the report and pick up his son from school by 3:30. Jamie was 7, second grade, smart as hell, and still adjusting to the fact that his mom wasn't coming back. She'd left 2 years ago. Just left. No fight, no dramatic confrontation, no explanation that made sense. One day Daniel came home to a note on the kitchen counter that said she couldn't do this anymore. This being their life, their family, everything they'd built, and that she needed to find herself. He'd tried to convince her to stay. For Jamie, for the vows they'd made. She'd been gone before he finished the conversation. The divorce papers came 6 weeks later. She didn't fight for custody, didn't ask for visitation, just signed everything and disappeared into whatever life she'd decided was more important than the one she'd left behind. Daniel had been a single father ever since. It had been the hardest 2 years of his life, learning to braid hair for picture day, figuring out how to talk about why mommy didn't call, making sure Jamie knew that none of it was his fault. But they'd found their rhythm. Breakfast together every morning, homework at the kitchen table every night, Saturdays at the park, Sundays doing laundry and meal prep for the week. It wasn't the life Daniel had planned, But it was his life, and he'd be damned if he'd let anyone take it from him. His phone buzzed. Text from Jamie's school. Parent pickup delayed until 4 p.m. today due to assembly. Good. That gave him an extra half hour. Daniel was taking notes on a support beam when the voices got closer. The executive tour had made it to level 12. Structural integrity is well ahead of schedule, Marcus was saying, his voice doing that thing where it went up half an octave when he was trying to impress someone. We've had 0 safety incidents on this level, and the framework is exceeding all specifications. Daniel didn't look up. He was crouched near the northeast corner, measuring deflection tolerances that were probably fine but felt slightly off. What about the concrete curing times? A woman's voice. Precise. The kind of tone that expected accurate answers. Claire Whitmore. All within normal parameters, Marcus said. We used accelerated methods on levels 8 through 10 to make up time lost during that weather delay in March, but everything's been signed off by engineering. Accelerated methods. That was one way to describe it. Another way would be they'd cut corners on curing time because the project was already 3 weeks behind schedule, and every day of delay cost the company money in contract penalties. Daniel made a note in his book, kept his head down. The group moved past him, 4 or 5 people in business attire, plus Marcus and another supervisor, all clustered around a woman in a charcoal suit who was asking questions that suggested she actually understood the answers. Daniel caught a glimpse of her, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, moving through the space like someone who'd read every blueprint and remembered all of them. Then they were gone, heading toward the elevator, and Daniel went back to work. He finished his inspection at 1:15, compiled his notes into a formal report, and took it to the site office. His direct supervisor, Tom Chen, was at his desk, eating a sandwich and scrolling through his phone. Got the level 12 inspection, Daniel said, setting the report down. Tom glanced at it. Any issues? Few things worth noting. Some cracking near the northeast support. Rebar configuration doesn't match the plans I've seen. Tom's expression didn't change. Cracking? Hairline. Could be normal settling, could be something else. Photos are in the report. Rebar? Might want engineering to take a look. Make sure we're within spec. Tom flipped through the pages, not really reading. You know how many inspection reports cross my desk every week, Danny? No. A lot. And you know how many of them flag stuff that turns out to be nothing? I'm just documenting what I saw. Yeah, and I appreciate that. But this project's already under the microscope. Last thing we need is to create problems that don't exist. Tom closed the report. I'll file it. If engineering needs to follow up, they will. Daniel recognized a dead end when he saw one. All right. Good man. Hey, you getting out of here on time today? 3:30. Say hi to Jamie for me. Daniel left the office knowing the report would get filed and forgotten. That was how it worked. You did your job, you documented the truth, and then you hoped someone further up the chain gave a damn. Usually they didn't. He was heading for the parking lot when he heard footsteps behind him. Excuse me. Daniel turned. It was one of the guys from the executive tour, young, probably late 20s, wearing a suit that cost more than Daniel's truck payment. He had the look of someone who'd never done a day of physical labor in his life, but thought he understood how construction worked because he'd read some books. Yeah, Daniel said. You're one of the site supervisors? That's right. The guy grinned. It wasn't a friendly expression. Some of us were talking and we've got a bet going. $20 says you won't go ask Claire Whitmore out. Daniel stared at him. What? Claire, the CEO. She's still on site, probably in the main office trailer. We're betting whether you've got the balls to actually walk up to her and shoot your shot. I'm not interested in your bet. Come on, man. It's just for fun. You're what, mid-30s? Single, right? I saw you're not wearing a ring. She's single too. You're both adults. I'm going home. $50, the guy said. 50 if you actually do it. Just walk in there and ask her out. What's the worst that could happen? Daniel could think of several things. Getting fired, getting blacklisted, losing the insurance that covered Jamie's asthma medication. But mostly, he was just tired. Tired of guys like this. Tired of being treated like entertainment. Tired of the constant low-grade disrespect that came with being the kind of man nobody noticed until they needed a joke. Not interested, he said again. But the guy was already walking away, laughing, pulling out his phone to tell his friends that the bet was still on. Daniel stood there in the parking lot, jaw tight, hands in his pockets. He should just leave. Clock out, pick up Jamie, go home. Forget this whole stupid day. That's what he should do. Instead, he found himself walking toward the main office trailer. Not because of the bet. Not because some asshole in an expensive suit thought it would be funny to watch him humiliate himself, but because he'd spent 6 years being invisible. 6 years keeping his head down and his mouth shut. 6 years watching problems get swept under the rug by people who cared more about timelines than safety. And he was tired of it. The trailer was nicer than the regular site offices. Actual furniture instead of folding chairs, a coffee maker that looked like it cost more than Daniel's monthly grocery budget. Claire Whitmore was standing near a desk, reviewing something on a tablet, her assistant or whoever beside her taking notes. Daniel knocked on the open door. She looked up. Yes? Up close, she was exactly what the rumors suggested. Sharp, focused, the kind of presence that made you stand a little straighter, but there was something else too, something the rumors didn't capture. She looked exhausted, not physically tired, but worn down in the way people get when they're carrying too much weight for too long. Ms. Whitmore, Daniel said. My name's Daniel Hayes. I'm a site supervisor on this project. All right. She set the tablet down, gave him her full attention. It was unnerving being looked at like that, like she was actually seeing him, not just looking past him the way most executives did. I need to tell you something, Daniel said, about this building. Her assistant, a thin man with glasses who looked annoyed by the interruption, started to say something, but Claire held up a hand. Go ahead, she said. Daniel had planned what to say, had practiced it in his head on the walk over. But standing there, facing someone who could destroy his career with a phone call, the words came out simpler than he'd intended. The rebar configuration on level 12 doesn't match the structural plans. The concrete's cracking in places it shouldn't. The materials inventory has been off for months, and I think someone's been substituting cheaper supplies to skim money off the budget. He pulled out his phone, showed her the photos. This is going to be a problem. Maybe not today, maybe not next year, but eventually. Claire took the phone, examined the images. Her expression didn't change. You've reported this through proper channels? Yes, ma'am. And? And I was told it would be filed. By whom? Daniel hesitated. Getting Tom Chen in trouble wouldn't help anything. Does it matter? Yes. My direct supervisor. But he's not the problem. The problem is that someone higher up made the decision to cut corners, and everyone below that level knows better than to make waves. Claire handed his phone back. You realize what you're saying. You're accusing this company, my company, of deliberately compromising safety standards on its flagship project. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm telling you what I've seen. What you do with that information is up to you. She studied him for a long moment. Daniel felt like he was being X-rayed, every thought and intention laid bare. Why come to me directly? She asked. Why not just file your report and walk away? Because I've been filing reports for 6 years and nothing changes. Because this building's going to house families, kids. He thought of Jamie, of the way his son trusted that the world was safe because his dad said so. Because someone should know the truth. And you think I don't? I think you're too far from the ground to see what's happening on it. No disrespect intended. Her assistant made a noise, offended on her behalf probably, but Claire's expression shifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. What's your name again? Daniel Hayes. Well, Mr. Hayes. She picked up a business card from the desk, wrote something on the back of it, and handed it to him. Send me everything you have. Photos, reports, documentation. My personal email. Daniel took the card. You're actually going to look into this? I'm going to determine whether your concerns have merit. If they do, I'll handle it. If they don't, we'll have a different conversation. She tilted her head slightly. That's what you wanted, isn't it? For someone to actually investigate? Yes, ma'am. Then send me the information. She turned back to her tablet, a clear dismissal. And Mr. Hayes? If you're wasting my time, you'll regret it. Understood. Daniel left the trailer, his heart pounding harder than it had any right to. He'd just gone over his supervisor's head, straight to the CEO, and basically accused the company of criminal negligence. Either he'd just saved lives, or he'd just ended his career. Possibly both. He checked his watch. 3 o'clock. Time to pick up Jamie. As he walked to his truck, he saw the guy from earlier, the one with the bet, standing with two of his friends near the parking area. They were laughing, watching him. Daniel ignored them. Whatever they thought had happened in that trailer, whatever joke they thought they'd made, it didn't matter. He had bigger problems now. The drive to Jamie's school took 20 minutes. Daniel spent most of it trying not to think about what he'd just done, focusing instead on the familiar rhythm of traffic, the radio playing classic rock at low volume, the mental checklist of things he needed to do when he got home. Jamie was waiting outside the main entrance with his backpack and a drawing he'd made in art class, some kind of spaceship, all bright colors and impossible proportions. "Dad!" He ran over, grinning. "Look what I made!" "That's amazing, buddy." Daniel took the drawing, examined it with the seriousness it deserved. "Is that a rocket?" "It's a Star Destroyer from the show we watched." Right, very cool." They drove home, Jamie talking nonstop about his day, about the assembly, about how Marcus in his class had brought a snake for show and tell, about the math test he'd aced. Daniel listened, asked questions, let his son's energy fill the truck cab, and push away the anxiety that had been building since the meeting with Claire Whitmore. This was what mattered. This right here. Their apartment was small, 2 bedrooms in a complex that had seen better days, but it was clean and safe and close to a good school. Daniel had learned to cook after his wife left. Nothing fancy, but Jamie didn't complain about the rotation of pasta, tacos, and stir-fry. While dinner cooked, Jamie did homework at the kitchen table. Daniel checked his phone twice, compulsively, even though he knew it was too soon for any response. "Dad, you're being weird," Jamie said, not looking up from his math worksheet. "Am I?" "You keep checking your phone. You only do that when you're worried about something." 7 years old and already too perceptive. Daniel put the phone face down on the counter. "Just work stuff. Nothing important. Is someone being mean to you again?" "Nobody, I promise. Because if they are, I'll tell them to stop." Daniel smiled despite everything. "I know you would, but I'm okay. Just a long day." They ate dinner. Daniel helped with the rest of the homework. Then they watched an episode of the space show Jamie loved. At 8:30, it was time for bed. "Story?" Jamie asked hopefully. "1 chapter." They were halfway through a book about a kid who discovered magic in his grandmother's attic. Daniel read slowly, doing different voices for each character, watching his son's eyes get heavy. By the time he reached the end of the chapter, Jamie was asleep. Daniel sat there for a moment, just watching him breathe. This perfect, trusting little person who believed his dad could fix anything, who didn't know yet how fragile the world was, how easily things could break. Daniel needed this job, needed the income, the insurance, the stability. And he just put all of it at risk because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. But what was the alternative? Say nothing? Let the building go up with compromised foundations because it was safer for him personally? He couldn't do that. He wouldn't. Daniel went to his own room, opened his laptop, and started compiling everything he had. Photos of the cracked concrete, copies of the inspection reports he'd filed, his notes about the inventory discrepancies, documented with dates and specific quantities, the specifications from the original structural plans, compared to what he'd actually seen installed. It took him 2 hours to organize it all into something coherent. At 11:47 p.m., he opened his email and typed Claire Whitmore's address from the business card she'd given him. His hands hovered over the keyboard. Last chance to back out. Last chance to delete it all and pretend he'd never seen anything wrong. But Jamie was asleep down the hall, trusting that his dad made good choices. And somewhere in this city, other families were going to move into the Meridian Tower, trusting that the people who built it had put their safety first. Daniel attached the files and typed a brief message. "Miss Whitmore, as requested, here's the documentation of the issues I mentioned. I've included photos, inspection reports, and comparison notes with the original specifications. I've also flagged the inventory discrepancies that suggest systematic material substitution. I know this isn't what you want to hear about your flagship project, but I'd rather be wrong and look paranoid than be right and say nothing. Respectfully, Daniel Hayes." He hit send before he could change his mind. Then he closed the laptop, turned off the light, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd just made the best decision of his life or the worst. Either way, there was no taking it back now. The email sat in his sent folder like a lit fuse. Daniel didn't sleep much that night. And when he finally did drift off around 2 in the morning, he dreamed about buildings collapsing in slow motion, steel beams bending like rubber while he stood watching, unable to move or shout a warning. He woke at 6 to Jamie jumping on his bed. "Dad, you said we could make pancakes today." Daniel groaned, checked his phone reflexively. No response from Claire Whitmore, which meant either she hadn't read it yet or she was busy figuring out how to fire him, and dragged himself to the kitchen. They made pancakes. Jamie insisted on helping, which meant batter ended up on the counter, the floor, and somehow on the ceiling, but his son was laughing, and that was worth the mess. "You're doing the thing again," Jamie said, pouring entirely too much syrup on his stack. "What thing?" "The worried face, the one where your eyebrows do this." Jamie scrunched up his face in an exaggerated impression. "I don't look like that." "You totally do. Is it work stuff?" Daniel cut into his own pancakes, buying time. "Yeah, just some decisions I'm waiting to hear about." "Good decisions or bad decisions?" "Don't know yet, buddy." "Well, if it's good, we should celebrate. And if it's bad, we should also celebrate because at least we'll know." Daniel looked at his 7-year-old son, who had syrup on his chin in absolute confidence that everything would work out, and felt something twist in his chest. "When'd you get so smart?" Jamie grinned. "I've always been smart. You just finally noticed." They finished breakfast, cleaned up the kitchen, and Daniel dropped Jamie off at his friend Marcus's house for a play date. Then he drove to the Meridian site, even though it was Saturday and he wasn't scheduled to work. He told himself he was just checking on things, making sure nothing urgent had come up overnight. The truth was, he couldn't stay away. The building pulled at him like a wound he couldn't stop touching. The site was quieter on weekends, skeleton crew only, mostly doing prep work for Monday. Daniel parked and walked through the gates, nodding at the security guard who'd seen him enough times to wave him through without question. He took the construction elevator up to level 12 again. The crack was still there, unchanged. Of course it was unchanged. Concrete didn't heal itself. But Daniel crouched beside it anyway, tracing the line with his fingers, trying to convince himself he hadn't overreacted. "You know, most people don't spend their Saturdays staring at concrete." Daniel jerked upright, spinning around. Claire Whitmore stood 10 feet away, dressed more casually than he'd seen her yesterday. Dark jeans, a blazer over a simple shirt, hair pulled back in a ponytail. But her eyes had that same sharp focus, like she was reading code he didn't know he was transmitting. "Miss Whitmore, I wasn't expecting anyone to be here." Clearly. She walked closer, looking past him at the crack he'd been examining. "Is this the one from your photos?" "Yes, ma'am." "Stop calling me ma'am. It makes me feel like I'm someone's grandmother." She crouched beside the crack, pulling out her phone and taking her own pictures. "You read the structural reports I sent you last night?" Daniel blinked. "You sent me reports?" "Around 3 in the morning. Check your email." He pulled out his phone, opened his inbox. There it was. An email from Claire Whitmore with 4 attachments sent at 2:47 a.m. "You were working at 3 in the morning? I was reading your documentation, which led me down a rabbit hole of engineering reports, permit filings, and contractor invoices." She stood, brushing dust off her knees. "You're right. The rebar configuration is wrong, not catastrophically, but wrong enough that it shouldn't have passed inspection." Daniel felt relief and dread in equal measure. "So what happens now?" "Now I need to figure out who approved the deviation and why." She looked at him directly. "Your supervisor filed your inspection report, did you know that?" "Tom?" "Yeah, I gave it to him yesterday. He filed it with a note saying the concerns were unsubstantiated and likely due to inspector inexperience." Her tone was flat, giving nothing away. "How long have you worked in construction, Mr. Hayes?" 14 years, 6 with Whitmore. "And how many building collapses have you been involved in?" "None." "Then I'd say you have exactly the right amount of experience." She walked toward the edge of the floor, looking out over the construction site below. "I pulled the permit history for this level. The rebar configuration was changed 8 weeks ago. The change order was approved by Richard Vance." The name meant nothing to Daniel. "Who's that?" "Senior VP of Development. He's been with the company for 12 years, came up through the finance side. Smart man. Very focused on margins and timelines." She turned back to face him. "The change saved approximately $40,000 in materials and cut 3 days off the schedule." at the cost of structural integrity? That's what I'm trying to determine. I've got an independent structural engineer coming Monday to review the work. Until then, I need you to do something for me. What? Keep documenting. Everything you see that doesn't match the plans, every inventory discrepancy, every corner you think someone's cutting. And don't tell anyone, and I mean anyone, that we're looking into this. Daniel hesitated. You want me to spy on my coworkers? I want you to do your job, which, as I understand it, includes ensuring this building is safe. She pulled a business card from her pocket, different from the one she'd given him yesterday. That's my personal cell. You see something, you text me, immediately. Not your supervisor, not the site manager, me. He took the card. Why are you trusting me with this? Because you came to me when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. That's either integrity or stupidity, and I'm hoping it's the former. She started toward the elevator, then paused. Also, for what it's worth, I looked into your employment file. 14 years in construction, 0 safety incidents, multiple commendations from previous employers. Your current supervisors describe you as adequate but unremarkable. That sounds about right. It's bullshit. I've seen remarkable, Mr. Hayes. It doesn't usually announce itself. She left before he could figure out how to respond to that. Daniel stood there on level 12, holding her business card, trying to process what had just happened. Claire Whitmore, the Ice Queen, the woman who supposedly made executives cry, had just told him to keep investigating, had validated his concerns, had given him her personal cell number. And she'd called him remarkable. That part he didn't know what to do with. He spent another hour on site, documenting everything he could find. By the time he left, he had 43 new photos and a growing suspicion that the problems went deeper than just one bad decision about rebar. That evening, after picking up Jamie and sitting through an elaborate storytelling session about the epic battles that had occurred during the playdate, Daniel opened the structural reports Claire had sent him. They were dense, full of engineering terminology and mathematical formulas that made his head hurt, but the conclusions were clear enough. The modifications to level 12 reduced the safety margin from 2.3 to 1.6, still within code technically, but only barely. And that was assuming the concrete quality matched specifications, which, based on the curing time shortcuts Marcus had mentioned, it probably didn't. Daniel made notes, cross-referenced them with his own observations, and by the time he looked up, it was past midnight and Jamie had been asleep for hours. Sunday passed in a blur of normal life. Grocery shopping, laundry, a trip to the park where Jamie insisted on trying the monkey bars, despite being slightly too short to reach them comfortably. Daniel stood beneath him, hands ready to catch, watching his son's face scrunch with determination. I can do it, Dad. Don't help. I'm not helping, I'm supervising. That's the same thing. It's really not. Jamie made it across, dropped to the ground with a triumphant shout, and immediately wanted to go again. Daniel's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Independent engineer confirmed your findings. Level 12 rebar config is substandard. Meeting with Vance tomorrow at 9 a.m. Need you there, Steetrel CW. His stomach dropped. Buddy, I need to make a quick call, okay? Stay where I can see you. He dialed Claire's number. She picked up on the second ring. Hayes? You want me in a meeting with a senior VP? I'm a site supervisor. That's going to look, I don't care how it looks. You found the problem, you documented it, you understand the technical details. I need someone in that room who can speak to the actual construction, not just the paperwork. He's going to know I went over everyone's head straight to you. Yes, he is. Is that a problem? Daniel watched Jamie climb the ladder for another round on the monkey bars. Thought about what happened to people who made waves, who challenged authority, who forgot their place in the hierarchy. No, he said. It's not a problem. Good. Conference room C, 9th floor of the main building, 8:45. Don't be late. She hung up before he could ask what he should wear or how he should prepare, or any of the 100 other questions piling up in his mind. Monday morning, Daniel dropped Jamie at school, then sat in his truck in the parking lot for 10 minutes, staring at his reflection in the rear-view mirror. He'd worn his one decent button-down shirt, the one he kept for parent-teacher conferences and the occasional funeral. It was wrinkled despite his best efforts with an iron. His work boots were clean but obviously work boots, scuffed leather, and steel toes, not the kind of shoes people wore to executive meetings. He looked exactly like what he was, a construction worker pretending to belong somewhere he didn't. The Whitmore Development headquarters was downtown, all glass and modern architecture, the kind of building that made you feel poor just walking past it. Daniel had never been inside. There'd never been a reason. Security stopped him in the lobby. "Can I help you?" "I have a meeting, 9th floor, conference room C." The guard checked his computer, frowned. "Name?" "Daniel Hayes." More typing. The frown deepened. "You're not on the visitor list. I was told to be here at 8:45. "By whom?" Before Daniel could answer, a voice cut through the lobby. "He's with me!" Claire Whitmore strode through the glass doors, already moving like she'd been awake for hours. She was wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent, her hair pulled back in that same severe ponytail, and she looked every inch the CEO. "Ms. Whitmore," the guard said, "I was just adding him to the permanent access list. Daniel Hayes, site supervisor on the Meridian project. He'll be coming to headquarters regularly for the next few weeks." She didn't slow down, just gestured for Daniel to follow. "Come on, we've got 20 minutes." Daniel hurried after her, aware of the security guard's confused stare, aware of the few early employees in the lobby watching them pass. The elevator ride was silent. Claire was reading something on her phone, frowning slightly. Daniel stood in the corner, trying not to feel like an imposter. "Stop that," she said, not looking up. "Stop what?" "Whatever you're doing in your head, the internal panic spiral. I can practically hear it from here." "I'm not." "You are. You're thinking about how you don't belong here, how everyone's going to know you're just a construction worker, how this is going to end badly." She finally looked up, meeting his eyes. "Here's what you need to understand. Richard Vance has been making decisions about this project for 18 months. I've been CEO for 5 years, and you, in one weekend, found a structural problem that none of us caught. So right now in this meeting, you're the expert. Act like it." The elevator doors opened. Conference room C was at the end of a hallway lined with abstract art that Daniel suspected was supposed to mean something profound. Through the glass walls, he could see a long table, expensive chairs, a view of the city that probably added 50 grand to the office lease. Richard Vance was already there, sitting at the head of the table. He was probably 50, gray at the temples, wearing a suit that fit the way suits did when they were custom made. He looked up when they entered, and his expression went through several rapid calculations. "Claire, I got your message about the engineering review." His eyes flicked to Daniel. "I wasn't aware we'd need additional staff for this meeting. This is Daniel Hayes. He's the site supervisor who identified the structural concerns." Vance's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, the concerned employee. Well, Mr. Hayes, I appreciate your diligence, but I think there may have been some miscommunication about the nature of the modifications made to Level 12. "There wasn't any miscommunication," Daniel said. "The rebar configuration doesn't match the structural plans. It matches the revised plans, which were approved by our engineering team and the city inspectors." Claire sat down, gestured for Daniel to do the same. "Show me the revised plans." Vance pulled a tablet from his briefcase, tapped a few times, and slid it across the table. As you can see, the modifications were properly documented and well within safety standards. Daniel looked at the plans. They were dated 6 weeks ago, formatted professionally, stamped with what looked like official engineering approval. They were also bullshit. "These show the rebar spacing at 16 inches, Daniel said. "The actual installation is at 22 inches. I measured it myself." "Then you measured incorrectly." "I took photos. 43 of them. I can show you the gaps." Vance's jaw tightened. "Mr. Hayes, I don't know what you think you're accomplishing here, but questioning the integrity of approved engineering documents is a serious accusation." "I'm not questioning the documents. I'm questioning whether anyone actually verified that the work matched what was approved. That's what inspectors are for." "When was the last inspection on Level 12? Vance hesitated, just for a second. It was enough. Claire leaned forward. "Richard, I had an independent structural engineer review the work Saturday morning. His report confirms that the rebar spacing is non-compliant with both the original and revised specifications. So either the installation crew ignored the plans, or the plans were changed after approval without documentation." "That's absurd." "Which part?" The non-compliant installation or the unauthorized modifications? Claire, I've been managing development projects for this company since before you took over as CEO. I understand you're trying to make your mark, prove you can handle the technical side, but undermining experienced executives based on the paranoid reports of a low-level supervisor is not good leadership. The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Daniel saw Claire's expression shift. Not anger exactly, but something colder and more dangerous. "Let me be very clear," she said, her voice quiet and precise. "I'm not undermining anyone. I'm investigating a potential safety violation on a project that has my name on it. And if you think loyalty to long-standing executives matters more to me than ensuring this building won't collapse, you've fundamentally misunderstood my priorities. I'm not suggesting—" "Yes, you are. You're suggesting I should ignore documented evidence because it's inconvenient for you." She stood, walked to the window, looked out at the city. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to provide me with every change order, every approval document, and every inspection report related to Level 12 by end of business today. I'm going to have them audited by external engineers. And if there are discrepancies, any discrepancies, you're going to explain exactly how they happened and who authorized them. This is absurd. You're treating me like a criminal over minor specification variances that happen on every construction project." "Minor?" Daniel couldn't keep quiet anymore. "You changed the structural support configuration to save $40,000 and 3 days. That's not minor. That's gambling with people's lives to hit a budget target." Vance turned to him, and for the first time, Daniel saw real anger break through the corporate polish. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Building a project this size requires constant adjustments. We make 100 decisions every week balancing safety, cost, and timeline. That's project management. That's the real world. Something you'd understand if you'd ever had to do anything more complex than swinging a hammer. I understand that concrete doesn't care about your timeline. I understand that steel doesn't respect your budget. And I understand that when this building is full of families and something goes wrong, nobody's going to give a damn about your project management philosophy." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Claire turned from the window. "Richard, take the rest of the day to compile the documentation I requested. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning." "Claire, you're making a mistake. You're letting some blue-collar nobody with a grudge turn you against the people who actually built this company. Get out." "Excuse me? I said get out, now, before I have security escort you." Vance stood, grabbed his briefcase, and walked to the door. He paused there, looked back at Daniel with an expression that promised consequences. "You just ended your career, Mr. Hayes. I hope it was worth it." Then he was gone. Daniel sat in the expensive chair, his heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. He'd just watched Claire Whitmore, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, choose him over a senior executive. Had watched her defend him, validate him, treat his concerns as legitimate. It didn't feel real. "That," Claire said, sitting back down, "could have gone better." "You think?" She almost smiled. "He's going to fight this. He's been with the company too long, has too many connections. He'll try to discredit you, claim you're fabricating evidence or exaggerating problems. Is he right? About me ending my career? Probably, if he has his way." She pulled out her phone, started typing. "Which is why we need to move faster than he does. I'm escalating this to the full board. Emergency session tomorrow afternoon. I want you there." "Another meeting?" "Another meeting. This time with the people who actually have the power to do something about it." She looked up. "Fair warning, it's going to get ugly. Vance has allies on the board, people who see you as a threat to the way things have always been done. They're going to come at you hard, question your credentials, your motives, your evidence. So basically like every day on a construction site, but with better vocabulary?" This time she did smile, just slightly. "Something like that. Can you handle it?" Daniel thought about Jamie, about the families who'd live in the Meridian Tower, about the choice between staying safe and doing what was right. "Yeah," he said. "I can handle it." "Good. Now go home. Get some rest. And Hayes?" She met his eyes. "Thank you for not backing down in there." He stood, started toward the door, then stopped. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why are you doing this? You could have just filed my report, done a quiet investigation, handled it internally. Instead, you're going to war with your own executive team, Why? Claire was quiet for a moment, and Daniel saw something shift in her expression, something that looked almost like vulnerability. My father built this company, she said. Spent 40 years building a reputation for quality and integrity. When I took over, people said I'd run it into the ground within 2 years, said I was too young, too inexperienced, too focused on the wrong things. She stood, walked to the window again. I've spent 5 years proving them wrong. 5 years building something I can be proud of. And I'll be damned if I let it all fall apart because someone prioritized profit margins over people's lives. She turned back to face him. That's why I'm doing this. Because the company my father built, the company I'm trying to protect, it doesn't cut corners. It doesn't compromise on safety. And it doesn't throw people away just because they're inconvenient. Daniel understood then. This wasn't just about the Meridian Tower. This was about everything she'd been fighting for since she took over. Everything she'd built and protected and refused to compromise on. And he'd just given her a reason to fight harder. I won't let you down, he said. I know you won't. Because if you were the kind of person who let people down, you never would have come to me in the first place. Daniel left the building feeling like he'd stepped into a different life. The security guard nodded to him on the way out. Not friendly, exactly, but acknowledging. Like he was someone who mattered. It was a strange feeling. His phone rang as he reached his truck. Tom Chen. Danny, what the hell is going on? I just got a call from Vance's office asking about your inspection reports, your employment history, everything. It's complicated. Yeah, well, uncomplicate it fast because I'm getting heat I don't need. Did you go over my head? Did you talk to someone about the level 12 issues? Daniel leaned against his truck, watching traffic pass. Yeah, I did. Jesus Christ, Danny, do you have any idea what you've done? Vance is connected. He's got friends in every department. You don't just accuse someone like that of cutting corners. I didn't accuse him of anything. I documented what I saw and reported it to someone who could investigate properly. Who? Who'd you report it to? Claire Whitmore. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. You went straight to the CEO. Yes. Over my head, over the site manager's head, over regional management, straight to the top. Yes. You're done, Danny. You know that, right? Even if you're right about the structural stuff, you just committed career suicide. Maybe. But at least I'll be able to sleep at night. Yeah, well, good luck sleeping when you can't pay your rent. Tom hung up. Daniel stood there in the parking lot, phone still in his hand, and felt the weight of what he'd set in motion settling over him. He'd just made an enemy of a senior executive, had alienated his direct supervisor, had essentially painted a target on his back for anyone who valued institutional loyalty over individual conscience. And the worst part? He'd do it all again. Because somewhere in this city, people were going to trust that the Meridian Tower was safe. We're going to make the biggest purchase of their lives based on that trust. We're going to raise their families in those luxury units, never knowing how close the building had come to being a disaster. They deserved better than corners cut in the name of profit margins. Daniel drove to Jamie's school, got there 20 minutes early, and sat in the pickup line watching kids pour out of the building. When Jamie finally emerged, backpack dragging on the ground, face lit up with whatever adventure had defined his day, Daniel felt something solidify in his chest. This was why. Not for promotions or recognition or proving himself to people who'd never see him as an equal. For this. For making sure the world his son grew up in was a little bit safer, a little bit more honest, a little bit better than the one he'd inherited. Dad! Jamie yanked open the truck door, threw himself into the seat. Guess what happened in science today? What happened? We made volcanoes, real ones. Well, fake real ones, with vinegar and baking soda. And mine exploded the most. Mrs. Peterson said it was very enthusiastic. That's my boy. Enthusiastic volcanoes. They drove home, Jamie narrating his entire day in breathless detail. Daniel listened, responded in the right places, and tried not to think about the board meeting tomorrow or what it would mean if things went badly. That night, after dinner and homework and the nightly chapter of their book, Daniel sat at his laptop and went through every photo he'd taken, every note he'd made, every piece of evidence he'd compiled. Tomorrow he'd be in a room full of people who controlled his future, who could fire him, blacklist him, make sure he never worked in this industry again. But tonight, He was just a father making sure he'd done everything possible to protect the people who would never know he existed. His phone buzzed. Text from Claire. Board meeting is at 2 p.m. Wear what you wore today. Don't try to look like them. They need to see who you are. Daniel looked down at his wrinkled button-down, his work-worn jeans. Who he was. A construction worker. A single father. A man who'd spent his entire career being invisible. Tomorrow, he'd step into a boardroom and make them see him. And whatever happened after that, at least he'd know he'd tried. By Tuesday morning, the rumor mill at Whitmore Development was running at full capacity. Daniel heard it the moment he walked onto the Meridian site. Hushed conversations that stopped when he passed. Sidelong glances from guys he'd worked alongside for years. The kind of tension that meant everyone knew something had gone down, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. Marcus Webb was waiting by the supply yard, arms crossed, face set in an expression that was trying hard to look authoritative and mostly just looked petty. Hayes, my office. Now. Daniel followed him to the site trailer, feeling the eyes of a dozen workers tracking his movement. Inside, Marcus closed the door and turned on him. What the hell did you do? I filed a safety report. You went to the CEO. Over everyone's head, over mine, over Tom's, over regional management. You made us all look incompetent. I documented structural problems and reported them to someone who could investigate. That's my job. Your job is to follow the chain of command. Your job is to not make waves that blow back on everyone else. Marcus jabbed a finger at him. Vance's office has been calling all morning. They want your employment records, your performance reviews, every single incident report you've ever filed. They're building a case against you. For what? Doing my job? For insubordination. For going outside proper channels. For making serious allegations without sufficient evidence. Marcus's voice dropped. Look, I don't know what you think you're accomplishing here, but you need to back off, apologize. Tell them you made a mistake, that you overreacted. I didn't overreact. The rebar configuration is wrong. The concrete's compromised. People could get hurt. Or nothing happens and you've just destroyed your career for no reason. Marcus sat down heavily in his chair. I'm trying to help you here, Danny. I know you've got a kid to support. You think you're going to find another job in this city after you've been fired from Whitmore for cause? Every contractor, every development firm, they'll all hear about this. You'll be done. Daniel stood there, understanding finally clicking into place. This wasn't about safety. This was about protecting the system, about maintaining the hierarchy, about making sure nobody rocked the boat hard enough to capsize it. I appreciate the concern, Daniel said, but I'm not backing off. Marcus stared at him. Then you're on your own. Don't come crying to me when they escort you off this site. Daniel left the trailer and went back to work. The other supervisors avoided him. The crew worked quietly, nobody cracking jokes or giving him shit the way they usually did. It was like he'd already been erased. At 1 o'clock, he left the site and drove to headquarters. The boardroom was on the 15th floor, at the end of a corridor that felt designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, original artwork that probably cost more than Daniel's truck. Silence that felt expensive. Claire was waiting outside the boardroom door. She'd changed since their meeting yesterday. Different suit, hair down instead of pulled back. She looked tired. Ready? She asked. No, but I'm here anyway. That'll have to do. She lowered her voice. Listen to me. These people are going to try to rattle you. They're going to question your expertise, your motives, everything. Don't let them. Answer their questions directly, stick to the facts, and don't apologize for doing your job. What if they fire me? Then they fire you, but at least you'll go down telling the truth. Not exactly reassuring, but Daniel appreciated the honesty. They walked in together. The boardroom was massive, a table that could seat 20, leather chairs that probably cost more than a month of Daniel's salary each, technology built into the walls that he didn't even recognize. 7 people were already seated, all of them looking up as Claire and Daniel entered. Richard Vance was there, sitting at the far end of the table with an expression that suggested he'd spent the last 24 hours preparing for war. Next to him sat a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and a gaze that could cut glass. Across from them, 3 men in expensive suits who all looked vaguely similar, successful, powerful, certain of their place in the world. At the head of the table sat an older man who Daniel recognized from company photos. Thomas Whitmore, Claire's father, the founder. He was in his 70s now, officially retired but still holding a seat on the board. His face was weathered, his hands scarred in a way that suggested he'd actually worked construction himself once, and he was watching Daniel with an expression that gave nothing away. "Thank you all for making time on short notice," Claire said, taking a seat and gesturing for Daniel to sit beside her. "I know we all have full schedules, so I'll be brief. We have a significant problem with the Meridian Tower project, and I need the board's support to address it properly." The gray-haired woman, her nameplate read Margaret Chen, no relation to Tom, leaned forward. "Claire, before we begin, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. You've called an emergency board session based on allegations from a site supervisor. That's highly unusual. The allegations are backed by documentation from an independent structural engineer. An engineer you hired without consulting the board or executive management," Vance said. "An engineer who spent all of 3 hours on site before delivering a report that conveniently supports your position. My position is that the building should meet structural specifications. If you consider that controversial, we have bigger problems than I thought." One of the suited men cleared his throat. "Ms. Whitmore, perhaps we could hear from Mr. Hayes directly. After all, he's the one who initiated these concerns." All eyes turned to Daniel. He felt his pulse spike, felt the weight of their attention like a physical pressure. These were people who controlled hundreds of millions of dollars, who made decisions that shaped the city's skyline, who existed in a world so far removed from his own that they might as well be different species. "Mr. Hayes," the man continued, "can you explain in your own words what led you to believe there were structural problems with Level 12? Daniel cleared his throat. "I was conducting a routine inspection 3 weeks ago, found cracking in the concrete near the northeast support column. The pattern suggested load distribution issues, so I checked the rebar configuration. It didn't match the structural plans." "And you're qualified to make that assessment?" "I've been working construction for 14 years. I've installed more rebar than I can count. I know what proper spacing looks like." "But you don't have an engineering degree." "No, sir, I don't. But I can read plans and I can measure gaps between metal bars. The specs called for 16-inch spacing. The installation was at 22 inches. That's not a judgment call. That's just math." Margaret Chen tapped her pen against her notepad. "Mr. Hayes, how many inspection reports have you filed in your time at Whitmore Development?" "I don't know the exact number, maybe 200. "And how many of those reports identified major structural concerns?" "This is the first one." "So in 6 years, you've never found anything this significant before. Isn't it possible that in this case, you've misidentified a minor variance as a major problem?" "It's possible. That is why I documented everything and reported it to people who could make that determination." Daniel pulled out his phone, opened his photo gallery. "But I don't think I'm wrong. The cracking follows stress lines. The rebar spacing creates weak points in the load distribution, and the concrete curing was accelerated to make up for schedule delays, which means it might not have reached full strength." He slid his phone across the table. Margaret picked it up, scrolled through the photos, her expression unreadable. "These could be normal settling," she said. "They could be. But they're not. Look at the angle of propagation in photo 12. That's not settling, that's structural stress." Vance leaned back in his chair. "With all due respect, Mr. Hayes, you're making a lot of assumptions based on limited information. The modifications made to Level 12 were reviewed and approved by licensed engineers. They were inspected by city officials. They meet every relevant code and standard." "They meet the minimum standards," Daniel said. "Barely. And that's assuming the concrete quality matches specifications, which it probably doesn't." "Probably?" "The curing was rushed. I heard your site manager talking about it during the CEO walkthrough last week. 3 days is not enough time for proper curing on a load-bearing floor." "You heard someone talking. That's your evidence?" "My evidence is everything I've documented over the past 3 weeks. The photos, the measurements, the timeline of modifications. All of it points to the same conclusion. Someone made decisions that prioritized cost and schedule over safety margins." The room went quiet. Thomas Whitmore, who hadn't spoken yet, leaned forward slightly. "Son, do you understand what you're accusing us of?" "I'm not accusing anyone of anything, sir. I'm reporting what I found and asking people who know more than I do to investigate it properly." "You went straight to my daughter, skipped every level of management between you and her. That's not following procedure." "No, sir, it's not. But I'd filed reports through proper channels before, and they got buried. So I made a choice. Follow procedure and hope someone paid attention, or go to someone I knew would take it seriously." And you knew Claire would take it seriously because Daniel looked at Claire, who was watching him with that same sharp focus she'd had since the day they met. Because everything I'd heard about her suggested she actually gave a damn about doing things right. Thomas's expression shifted, something that might have been amusement flickering across his face. Everything you'd heard. Yes, sir. The rumors say she's tough, demanding, that she doesn't tolerate shortcuts or excuses. I figured if anyone was going to actually investigate, it would be her. The rumors also say she's trying to prove herself by undermining people who've been with this company longer than she has, Vance said. That she's looking for excuses to push out experienced executives and replace them with people who'll do whatever she wants without question. Claire's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Margaret Chen set Daniel's phone down. These photos do show concerning patterns, but concerning isn't the same as dangerous. We build to code, not to perfection. Every project has minor variances. This isn't minor, Daniel said. This is a systematic reduction in safety margins to save money and time. And if it's happening on level 12, it's probably happening on other levels too. Do you have evidence of that? No, ma'am. Just logic. If someone approved these changes once, they probably approved similar changes elsewhere. Logic isn't evidence. No, but it's enough to justify a full structural audit. One of the suited men who hadn't spoken yet spoke up. A full audit would delay the project by months, cost millions, destroy our reputation with buyers who've already put deposits down, all based on the suspicions of one site supervisor who has no engineering credentials and a history of... He glanced at a folder in front of him. What your supervisors describe as excessive caution, bordering on paranoia. Daniel felt heat rise in his chest. Who wrote that? Your performance reviews. Multiple supervisors over the past 3 years have noted that you tend to overreact to minor issues and slow down work with unnecessary safety checks. Those unnecessary safety checks are the reason we've had 0 incidents on my crews. Or they're the reason your crews consistently run behind schedule. I'll take behind schedule over someone getting hurt. That's easy to say when you're not the one responsible for budget overruns and contract penalties. The man closed the folder. Mr. Hayes, I appreciate your dedication to safety, but you're asking us to bet the company's reputation on your gut feeling. That's not how we make decisions. Claire cut in before Daniel could respond. Actually, that's exactly how we should make decisions. When someone with 14 years of field experience tells us there's a problem, we investigate. We don't dismiss them because it's inconvenient. Claire, we've all read the independent engineer's report, Margaret said. It confirms that the rebar spacing is below specification, but it also confirms that the structure is still within code. We're talking about reduced safety margins, not imminent danger. Reduce safety margins on a building that will house families for the next 50 years. Every building has safety margins. That's why they're called margins. We don't build to the absolute maximum possible safety standard because it would be economically unfeasible. We also don't deliberately cut corners to save $40,000. Vance spread his hands. Claire, nobody's cutting corners. We made informed decisions about specifications based on professional engineering analysis. The fact that those decisions also happen to save money and time doesn't make them wrong. It makes them good management. Good management doesn't compromise structural integrity. We didn't compromise anything. We adjusted specifications within acceptable parameters. That's standard practice on every major project. Then why didn't you document the changes properly? Daniel asked. Why did the revised plans show 16-inch spacing when the actual installation was 22 inches? Vance's expression hardened. The plans were updated. If there's a documentation error, that's an administrative issue, not a structural one. An administrative issue that just happened to hide the fact that you were installing substandard materials. Mr. Hayes, I don't appreciate your tone, and I don't appreciate being accused of fraud by someone who doesn't have the credentials to understand what he's looking at. I understand enough to know that concrete cracks when it's under stress it wasn't designed to handle. I understand enough to know that reducing rebar density creates weak points. And I understand enough to know that when people start hiding changes in paperwork, it's because they know those changes wouldn't pass scrutiny. The room erupted. Vance started talking over him. Margaret was trying to restore order. One of the suited men was demanding that Daniel be removed from the meeting, and Claire was on her feet, her voice cutting through the chaos. Enough! Everyone stopped. Claire stood at the head of the table, hands flat on the polished wood, looking at each board member in turn. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. "We're going to halt construction on the Meridian Tower pending a complete structural audit. We're going to hire an independent firm, chosen by the board, not by me, to review every level that's been completed. And we're going to determine whether the modifications that were made meet our standards, not just minimum code requirements." "That will cost millions," one of the suited men said. "Yes, it will. But it will cost significantly more if we ignore this and someone gets hurt." "Claire, you're overreacting," Vance said. "You're letting one paranoid employee drive policy decisions that should be made by experienced executives. Richard, you've been with this company for 12 years. I respect that. But Mr. Hayes has been working construction sites for 14 years. He's seen buildings go up, seen them fail, seen what happens when people cut corners. His experience is relevant, his concerns are valid, and I'm not going to dismiss them just because it's uncomfortable for you." Margaret Chen stood. "Claire, I understand your position, but you're asking us to make a decision that could bankrupt this project based on incomplete information. We need more than photos and suspicions." "Then we get more. We do the audit. And if the audit shows that Mr. Hayes is wrong, that the structure is sound and we've just wasted months and millions of dollars?" Claire looked at Daniel. He looked back at her, saw the question in her eyes. Was he sure? Was he willing to bet everything on this? Daniel thought about the crack he'd found, about the rebar spacing, about Jamie, about all the kids who might live in that building someday, trusting that the people who built it had put their safety first. He nodded. Claire turned back to the board. "If the audit shows I'm wrong, I'll take full responsibility. But we're doing it." Thomas Whitmore, who had been silent through the entire exchange, finally spoke. "All in favor of the structural audit?" Claire raised her hand immediately. After a long moment, Margaret raised hers. One of the suited men followed reluctantly. "Opposed?" Vance's hand went up, along with the other two suited men. Thomas looked at the split vote, then at Claire, then at Daniel. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "if we do this audit and find that you're wrong, you understand you'll be fired. Not just from this project, but from the company. Your name will be associated with a multi-million-dollar mistake based on faulty judgment. You'll likely never work in this industry again." "Yes, sir, I understand. And if you're right, if we find systematic problems with the structure, then we fix them before someone gets hurt." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful. "I started this company 43 years ago," he said finally. "Built it from nothing. Every building we put up, I made sure it was done right. Not because it was profitable, but because people were going to trust us with their safety, with their lives." He looked at Vance. "Somewhere along the way, I think we forgot that." He raised his hand. "Motion carries," he said. "We do the audit." The meeting dissolved into logistics. Which firm to hire, what the scope would be, how to communicate the delay to investors and buyers. Daniel sat through it in a daze, barely processing the words flying back and forth across the table. He'd just bet his entire career on being right, and he wouldn't know if he'd won or lost for weeks. Finally, Claire dismissed the board. People filed out, some avoiding eye contact with Daniel, others giving him looks that ranged from pity to contempt. Vance stopped at the door. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly. "Both of you." Then he was gone. Daniel and Claire sat alone in the boardroom, the silence heavy. "Well," Claire said, "that was fun." "Is it always like that?" "No. Usually it's worse." She stood, gathered her papers. "The audit firm will start work next Monday. Results in 4 to 6 weeks. Until then, you're on administrative leave with full pay." "They're suspending me?" "They're protecting you. If you're on site while this is all playing out, Vance or his allies will make your life hell. Better to keep you away until we have answers." "What am I supposed to do for 6 weeks?" "Spend time with your son. Catch up on sleep. Try not to think about the fact that your entire future is hanging on whether those cracks are as serious as you think they are." Daniel laughed, slightly hysterical. "That's not helpful." "No, but it's honest." She walked to the door, paused. "Hey, you did good in there. You didn't back down. You didn't apologize for knowing what you know. That takes guts. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing." Daniel drove home in a fog. Administrative leave. 4 to 6 weeks of waiting. 4 to 6 weeks of not knowing if he'd just saved lives or destroyed his own. Jamie was at aftercare. Daniel picked him up, listened to another story about volcanoes and science experiments, and tried to act normal. That night, after Jamie was asleep, Daniel sat on his small balcony and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, the Meridian Tower stood incomplete, a skeleton of steel and concrete holding secrets that might vindicate him or bury him. His phone buzzed, text from a number he didn't recognize. "You made a powerful enemy today. Watch your back." Daniel stared at the message, his stomach dropping. He should have felt afraid, should have felt like he'd made a terrible mistake. Instead, he just felt tired. He deleted the message and went to bed. The next morning, Daniel took Jamie to school like always, then found himself with nothing to do. No job site to visit, no inspections to run, just hours stretching ahead with nothing but his own thoughts for company. He tried to enjoy it, sleeping in, going to the gym, catching up on shows he'd been meaning to watch. But it felt wrong, like playing hooky when there was work to be done. 3 days into his leave, Claire called. "How are you holding up?" "I'm going insane. How's the audit going?" They started Monday. So far, they found 12 instances of rebar configuration that doesn't match specifications. Daniel's chest tightened. 12? On how many levels? 4. They're working top to bottom, should have the full building covered by end of next week. Is it bad enough to prove I was right? It's bad enough to prove someone was making unauthorized changes. Whether it's dangerous is still TBD. She paused. Vance has been spreading rumors, saying you fabricated evidence, that you have a grudge against him, that you're trying to sabotage the project to get attention. People believe that? Some do. Others are reserving judgment until the audit's complete. What do you believe? I believe you saw something wrong and reported it. Everything else is noise. Daniel leaned against his kitchen counter, looking out at the parking lot. You know what's weird? I thought being right would feel better than this. Being right usually just means you get to watch other people scramble to cover their asses. Yeah, I'm noticing that. They talked for a few more minutes, Claire filling him in on the corporate maneuvering happening behind the scenes, board members taking sides, executives positioning themselves to avoid blame, investors demanding answers. When she hung up, Daniel felt more alone than he had in years. 2 weeks into the audit, the preliminary findings leaked to the press. Daniel found out when Rico called him, voice tight with panic. "Danny, man, you seen the news?" "What news?" "Turn on Channel 7, now." Daniel grabbed the remote, flipped to the local news station. There, on screen, was footage of the Meridian Tower with a breaking news banner. "Safety concerns halt luxury development." The reporter was standing in front of the site, explaining that Whitmore Development had ordered a complete structural audit following allegations from an employee about substandard construction practices. They didn't name Daniel, but in an industry this size, in a city this connected, it wouldn't take long for people to figure it out. His phone started ringing. First Tom Chen, then Marcus, then numbers he didn't recognize. Daniel ignored them all. By evening, the story had spread to the major news outlets. Business reporters were calling it a potential scandal. Architecture blogs were speculating about what the findings might mean for Whitmore Development's other projects. Investors were demanding statements. Daniel's phone rang again. This time it was Claire. "Don't talk to anyone," she said, no preamble. "Press, coworkers, nobody. Anything you say will be twisted and used against you." "How bad is it? For the company?" "Pretty bad. Our stock dropped 6% today. 3 major investors are threatening to pull out. The city's planning commission is talking about reviewing all our active permits." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. This needed to happen. Better a controlled audit now than a catastrophic failure later. Vance is going to destroy me for this." "Vance is too busy trying to save his own career to worry about you. The board's appointed an independent counsel to investigate who approved the unauthorized changes. If they find he was involved, he's done." Daniel sat down heavily on his couch. "I didn't want this to become a media circus." "Neither did I, but here we are." Claire's voice softened slightly. "How's your son handling all this?" "He doesn't know. I haven't told him anything." "Good. Keep it that way. Kids don't need to carry their parents' stress." After she hung up, Daniel sat in the dark and thought about all the ways this could still go wrong. Even if the audit proved him right, even if they found systematic problems, he'd still be the guy who blew the whistle. the troublemaker, the one who couldn't just keep his head down and his mouth shut. That reputation would follow him forever. His phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. "You think you're a hero. You're just a fool who doesn't know when to quit." Daniel blocked the number and tried to sleep. The audit took 5 weeks total. 5 weeks of Daniel living in limbo, spending his days at parks with Jamie, his nights reviewing documentation he'd already memorized, waiting for the verdict that would determine everything. When the final report came through, Claire called him at 7 in the morning. "It's done. Can you come to headquarters today?" "Is it bad?" "Just come. 2 o'clock. Conference room C." Daniel spent the next 7 hours in a state of suspended panic. He dropped Jamie at school, tried to eat breakfast, went for a run that didn't help calm his nerves. By the time he drove to headquarters, his hands were shaking. Claire met him in the lobby. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. Her suit slightly rumpled, hair pulled back in a ponytone that suggested she'd been up all night. "Before we go up," she said, "I need you to know that whatever happens in that room, you did the right thing. You hear me?" "Claire, just tell me, did they find problems or didn't they?" She smiled slightly. "They found problems. A lot of them." Daniel felt his knees go weak. "How bad?" "Bad enough that we're looking at a complete reconstruction of levels 8 through 15. Bad enough that Richard Vance was escorted from the building this morning and is currently under investigation for fraud and criminal negligence. Bad enough that the board is implementing new oversight procedures for all future projects." "So I was right." "You were right." Daniel leaned against the wall, trying to process it. He'd been right. The building was compromised. People could have been hurt, and he'd stopped it. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we go fix it, and you're going to help." "What?" Claire started toward the elevator. "The board wants to offer you a new position, Director of Construction Safety and Integrity. You'd oversee all our projects, review all structural modifications, have authority to halt work if you see problems. Salaries double what you were making as a site supervisor, full benefits, company car." Daniel stared at her. "You're joking." "I don't joke about personnel decisions." The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside, waited for him to follow. "You proved that our existing oversight wasn't good enough. You proved that sometimes the people on the ground see things executives miss. The board wants to make sure that never happens again, which means they need someone they can trust to tell them the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. They want me. I want you." The board agreed. So did my father. She pushed the button for the 15th floor. "What do you say?" Daniel thought about Jamie, about the stability this would provide. Thought about never having to worry about making rent or affording medicine. Thought about having the authority to actually fix problems instead of just documenting them. "Yes," he said. "I say yes." The elevator doors opened to applause. The boardroom was full, board members, executives, senior managers. Thomas Whitmore stood at the head of the table, and when Daniel entered, he started clapping. Others joined in, and suddenly Daniel was standing in front of people who'd dismissed him weeks ago, receiving recognition he'd never expected and wasn't sure he'd earned. "Mr. Hayes," Thomas said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Welcome to the executive team." The applause felt surreal. Daniel stood there in his same wrinkled button-down, same worn jeans, feeling like he'd walked onto the wrong movie set. These people, board members in tailored suits, executives who probably had personal assistants to schedule their personal assistants, were clapping for him. He didn't know what to do with his hands. Thomas Whitmore gestured to the chair beside Claire. Daniel sat, acutely aware that the chair probably cost more than his monthly truck payment. "Before we get into the details of your new role," Thomas said, settling back into his own seat, "I want to address something. There are people in this room who dismissed your concerns initially, who thought you were overstepping, causing unnecessary problems. I was one of them." The room went quiet. "I spent 40 years building this company on a reputation for quality. Somewhere along the line, I stopped paying attention to whether we were living up to that reputation or just coasting on it. That's on me." He looked directly at Daniel. "You did what I should have been doing all along, putting safety above everything else. I'm grateful. And I'm sorry it took a near disaster to make us listen." Daniel didn't know what to say to that. "I just did my job, sir." "No. You did more than your job. You risked everything to do what was right. That's rare." Thomas opened a folder in front of him. The audit found systematic issues across 8 levels. Rebar configurations that didn't match specs, concrete that was undercured, support columns that were installed with cheaper materials than specified. If we'd completed the building and something had triggered a failure, an earthquake, a wind event, even just accumulated stress over time, people would have died. You prevented that. Margaret Chen, who'd questioned Daniel so aggressively at the first board meeting, cleared her throat. Mr. Hayes, I owe you an apology. I suggested you were overreacting, that you didn't have the credentials to make these assessments. I was wrong. You were doing your job, Daniel said, asking hard questions, making sure decisions were based on facts, not feelings. I don't blame you for that. That's generous, but I should have taken your concerns more seriously from the start. She glanced at Claire. We all should have. One of the suited men, Daniel remembered him from the first meeting, the one who'd quoted his performance reviews, spoke up. The question now is what we do moving forward. The Meridian reconstruction is going to cost approximately $18 million and delay completion by 8 months. We've already lost 3 major investors. Our reputation has taken a significant hit, which is exactly why we need someone like Mr. Hayes in a leadership position, Claire said, to make sure this never happens again. With respect, Miss Whitmore, Mr. Hayes has been a supervisor for 6 years. This is a significant jump in responsibility. He identified a multi-million-dollar problem that everyone else missed. I'd say he's qualified. The man's expression tightened, but he didn't argue further. Thomas pulled out a contract. Daniel, can I call you Daniel? Yes, sir. Here's what we're offering. Director of Construction Safety and Integrity. Your primary responsibility is oversight of all structural work across all our projects. You report directly to Claire, with authority to halt any work you believe compromises safety. Salary is $140,000 annually, full benefits, company car, and a signing bonus to compensate for the stress of the past 6 weeks. Daniel's brain stuttered. $140,000. That was more than double his current salary. That was stability. That was Jamie's college fund. That was not having to choose between fixing the truck and buying groceries. I don't have an engineering degree, he said. You have 14 years of field experience. You'll work with our engineering team, rely on their technical expertise. But your instincts are what we're buying. Your willingness to speak up when something's wrong. What if I make mistakes? What if I shut down work unnecessarily? Then we'll deal with it. I'd rather have someone who errs on the side of caution than someone who lets problems slide to save money. Thomas slid the contract across the table. Take your time. Read it carefully. But I hope you'll accept. Daniel picked up the contract, the paper feeling heavy in his hands. This was it. The moment that would change everything. I need to talk to my son first, he said. This is going to affect his life too. Thomas smiled slightly. That's exactly the kind of answer I was hoping for. Take the weekend. Let us know Monday. The meeting dissolved into logistics and congratulations. People Daniel had never spoken to came up to shake his hand, tell him they'd always believed in him, offer advice about navigating executive life. It was overwhelming and exhausting, and Daniel couldn't wait to get out of there. Claire walked him to the elevator. You okay? She asked. I don't know. I think I'm in shock. That's fair. This is a lot. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside with him, pressed the button for the lobby. For what it's worth, you earned this. Not because you got lucky or because I felt sorry for you. You earned it by being willing to do the hard thing when everyone else was taking the easy path. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. Brave people usually do. The elevator descended smoothly, and Daniel watched the floor numbers tick down. Can I give you some advice? Please? Don't try to become someone else now that you're an executive. The reason you're good at this is because you see things from the ground level. You know what workers deal with, what gets missed in the chain of command. If you start thinking like the people in that boardroom, you'll lose that perspective. So stay myself. Stay yourself, just with a better paycheck and less anxiety about making rent. Daniel almost laughed. When you put it that way. The elevator reached the lobby. Claire held the door. One more thing. Vance is gone, but he had allies. People who think the way he thinks, who see safety measures as obstacles to profit. They're going to push back against you, try to undermine you, claim you're being too cautious, too expensive. Don't let them. Easy for you to say. You're the CEO. And 6 years ago, I was the boss's daughter who everyone assumed was incompetent. They tried to push me out too. I'm still here because I didn't let them. She stepped out of the elevator, then turned back. You're stronger than you think, Daniel. Trust yourself. The doors closed before he could respond. Daniel drove home in a daze. He picked up Jamie from school, endured the usual enthusiastic recap of the day, and tried to figure out how to explain that their entire life was about to change. They made dinner together. Spaghetti, Jamie's favorite. While the water boiled, Daniel sat his son down at the kitchen table. Buddy, I need to talk to you about something important. Jamie looked up from the drawing he'd been working on. Did someone die? What? No, why would you think that? Because you have your serious face. You only use that face for serious talks. This is serious, but good serious. I got a new job offer today. Jamie's eyes widened. Like a promotion? Yeah, a big one. It would mean more money, better insurance, a lot more responsibility. That's great, you should take it. It's not that simple. This job is going to take more of my time. I might have to work longer hours, travel sometimes. I won't be able to pick you up from school every day. Jamie was quiet for a moment, processing. Would we have to move? No, we'd stay in the same apartment, same school, same everything. Just, I'd be busier. But you'd still be home for dinner? Most nights, yeah. And we'd still do story time? Always. Jamie nodded slowly. Then I think you should do it. You're always worried about money. If this job means you don't have to worry as much, that's good. Daniel felt his throat tighten. 7 years old and already carrying worries no kid should have to think about. You're pretty smart, you know that? I know, I get it from you. They ate dinner, did homework, went through the normal evening routine. But that night, after Jamie fell asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with the contract spread in front of him. $140,000 a year. Health insurance that would cover Jamie's asthma medication without him having to argue with the pharmacy every month. A signing bonus that would let him finally replace the truck's dying transmission. Stability. But also pressure. Responsibility. The weight of knowing that his decisions would affect hundreds of people, millions of dollars, the safety of buildings across the city. His phone buzzed. Text from Claire. Stop overthinking. Sign the damn contract. Daniel smiled despite himself, typed back, How'd you know I was overthinking? Because I know you. You're sitting at your kitchen table right now, making a list of all the ways this could go wrong instead of celebrating. She wasn't wrong. What if I'm not ready for this? Nobody's ever ready. You just do it anyway and figure it out as you go. That's terrible advice. It's the only advice that matters. See you Monday. Daniel set his phone down, looked at the contract one more time, and signed it. Monday morning, he showed up at headquarters at 8 sharp. He'd bought 2 new shirts over the weekend. Nothing fancy, just button-downs that didn't have wrinkles ironed permanently into the fabric. He felt only slightly less like an imposter. Claire met him in the lobby with a coffee and a wry expression. Welcome to the executive team. Your office is on 14 Marche. I have an office. You're a director now? You get an office, an assistant, and a parking spot with your name on it. Try not to let it go to your head. His office was smaller than he'd expected, which was good, because anything larger would have felt ridiculous. But it had a window overlooking the city, a desk that wasn't secondhand, and a nameplate that read Daniel Hayes, Director of Construction Safety and Integrity. He stood in the doorway staring at it. Weird, right? Claire said from behind him. Very weird. You'll get used to it. Come on, I'll introduce you to your team. She led him down the hall to a conference room where 3 people were waiting. A woman in her 40s with graying hair and sharp eyes, a younger man with glasses who looked fresh out of college, and another woman about Daniel's age with the kind of posture that suggested military background. Daniel Hayes, meet your team. This is Patricia Morris, Senior Structural Engineer. She's been with us for 12 years and knows more about building codes than anyone I've ever met. This is Kevin Zhao, Junior Engineer, MIT graduate, very smart and very eager. And this is Sarah Mendez, Field Operations Coordinator, former Army Corps of Engineers. Daniel shook hands with each of them, feeling completely out of his depth. Patricia spoke first. Mr. Hayes, I reviewed the Meridian audit findings. Your initial assessment was spot on. I'm looking forward to working with someone who actually understands field conditions. Please call me Daniel, and I'm going to need a lot of help from all of you. I know construction, but the engineering side is going to be a learning curve. That's what we're here for, Kevin said. Ms. Whitmore said you have great instincts for identifying problems. We can handle the technical analysis. Sarah leaned back in her chair. I read your file. 14 years, 0 safety incidents, multiple commendations. That's impressive. Most supervisors have at least a few incidents, even minor ones. I got lucky. Nobody's that lucky for 14 years. You were careful. That's the kind of leadership we need. Claire checked her watch. I'll let you all get acquainted. Daniel, staff meeting at 10. Your first assignment is reviewing the Harbor Point project. 20-story mixed-use development currently at foundation stage. Patricia will brief you. She left, and Daniel found himself alone with 3 people who were apparently his team now. Patricia pulled out a tablet. Let's start with what you need to know about Harbor Point. The next 2 hours were a crash course in everything Daniel had never learned about structural engineering. Patricia explained load calculations, soil composition analysis, seismic requirements. Kevin walked him through the digital tools they used for modeling and simulation. Sarah outlined the field inspection protocols and how to coordinate with site supervisors. By 10 o'clock, Daniel's head was spinning. The staff meeting was in the main conference room with about 20 people, project managers, senior engineers, department heads. Daniel recognized a few faces from the board meetings, but most were strangers. Claire ran the meeting with brutal efficiency, moving through agenda items at a pace that left no room for rambling. When she got to new business, she gestured to Daniel. Most of you have heard about the Meridian situation. For those who haven't, we discovered systematic structural issues that required a complete audit and partial reconstruction. That's going to cost us millions and delay the project significantly. It's also going to change how we operate going forward. She outlined the new oversight procedures, mandatory independent reviews for all structural modifications, random audits of ongoing projects, direct reporting lines from field supervisors to the safety office. Daniel Hayes is leading this initiative. He'll have authority to halt any project if he identifies safety concerns. That authority supersedes project managers, regional directors, everyone in this room except me. If he says stop, you stop. Questions? A man Daniel didn't recognize raised his hand. With respect, isn't that going to create significant delays? If we have to pause every time there's a minor concern, there are no minor concerns when it comes to structural safety, Claire said. If Daniel stops your project, it's because he has good reason. Your job is to address the concern, not fight him on it. I understand that, but from a practical standpoint, Whitmore Development just avoided a potential disaster that could have killed people and destroyed this company. I'm not interested in arguments about efficiency when we're talking about safety. Are we clear? The man nodded, clearly unhappy, but unwilling to push further. The meeting continued. Daniel sat quietly, taking notes, trying to absorb the dozen different projects being discussed. By the time it ended, he felt like he'd been drinking from a fire hose. Claire caught him on the way out. How are you holding up? Overwhelmed. Is it always this intense? Usually worse. You'll adapt. She handed him a folder. Harbor Point inspection is scheduled for tomorrow morning. 7 a.m. Patricia and Sarah will meet you on site. Tomorrow? I haven't even finished reviewing the plans. Then you better work late tonight. Welcome to management. She walked away, already focused on her next meeting, leaving Daniel standing in the hallway holding a folder full of technical documents he didn't fully understand yet. That night, after Jamie was asleep, Daniel spread the Harbor Point plans across his kitchen table and tried to make sense of them. The engineering diagrams were dense, full of calculations and specifications that made his eyes cross. But underneath all the technical language, he could see the bones of the building, the foundation, the support structure, the load distribution. It was like reading a different language, but one where he knew enough root words to piece together meaning. His phone rang. Patricia. Mr. Hayes, Daniel, I figured you might have questions about the Harbor Point plans. A few hundred, yeah. I'm working late anyway. Want a video call? I can walk you through the sections that are relevant for tomorrow's inspection. For the next 2 hours, Patricia explained soil compaction requirements, foundation integrity checks, the specific concerns with the Harbor Point site. She was patient, thorough, and didn't make him feel stupid for asking basic questions. "You're picking this up faster than I expected," she said as they wrapped up. "Most people with your background would be drowning in the technical details." "I'm definitely drowning. I'm just good at hiding it," she laughed. "Well, keep hiding it. The team needs someone who understands both the field work and the engineering theory. You're going to bridge that gap." After they hung up, Daniel spent another hour reviewing the inspection checklist, memorizing the key points to look for, preparing for his first official site visit as a director. He fell asleep at the table, head on the Harbor Point plans, and woke at 2 a.m. with a crick in his neck and the irrational fear that he'd already failed at his new job. The Harbor Point site was across town, a massive lot near the waterfront where the foundation work was just beginning. Daniel arrived at 6:45, earlier than necessary, and found Patricia and Sarah already there, standing next to a company SUV that Daniel realized was his now. "Morning," Sarah said, handing him a hard hat and safety vest. "Ready to do this?" "As ready as I'll ever be." They walked the site together, Daniel asking questions, Patricia providing technical context, Sarah pointing out potential safety concerns. The foundation work looked solid, proper depth, correct reinforcement, good concrete quality. But there was something off about the drainage system. The plans called for specific runoff channels to prevent water accumulation, but the installed system didn't quite match. Daniel stopped, crouched down, examined the drainage pipes. "These are smaller diameter than specified," he said. Patricia checked her tablet. "Plans call for 8-inch. These look like 6. "Could be a supply issue," Sarah said. "Sometimes contractors substitute if they can't get the exact spec." "Did anyone approve the substitution?" Sarah pulled up the modification log on her phone. "Nothing here. No change orders, no documentation." Daniel stood, looked around the site. The workers were doing their jobs. The supervisor was coordinating crews. Everything looked normal. But this was exactly the kind of small deviation that added up to big problems. "We need to talk to the site supervisor." The supervisor was a guy about Daniel's age named Mike Chen, no relation to Tom or Margaret. He looked annoyed when they pulled him aside. "Problem?" "The drainage pipes don't match the specifications," Daniel said. "Can you explain why?" "We had a delivery delay on the 8-inch. Supplier said it would be 2 weeks, which would have put us behind schedule. I made a judgment call, went with 6-inch since it was in stock." "Did you file a modification request?" Mike's expression shifted, defensive. "Look, I've been doing this for 15 years. 6-inch versus 8-inch on drainage isn't going to compromise the building. It's a minor variance." "It's an unauthorized variance? The specs exist for a reason." "The specs are written by engineers who've never actually built anything. Sometimes field conditions require adjustments." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. He'd had this exact conversation before, on the other side. He knew the pressure Mike was under. Deadlines, budget constraints, supervisors demanding results. But he also knew where that pressure led if you let it override procedure. "I understand the position you're in," Daniel said, "but we can't have supervisors making structural modifications without documentation and approval. That's exactly what caused the Meridian problems. This isn't structural, it's drainage. It's still a deviation from approved plans, which means it needs to be documented and reviewed." Mike crossed his arms. "So what? You're shutting down my site over pipe diameter?" "I'm asking you to halt installation until we can review the change and determine if it's acceptable. If engineering signs off, you can continue. If not, we replace the pipes with correct spec. That's going to cost us 3 days." "Then it costs us 3 days." Mike stared at him, clearly weighing whether to push back harder. Daniel held his ground, aware that Patricia and Sarah were watching, that this was his first real test of authority. Finally, Mike nodded, short and sharp. "Fine. I'll halt installation, but I'm filing a complaint with regional management about unnecessary delays." "That's your right." Mike walked away, pulling out his phone, already making calls. Daniel turned to Patricia and Sarah. "Did I just overreact?" "No," Patricia said. "You did exactly what you should have done. Unauthorized modifications are how problems happen." "Mike's going to make this difficult." Sarah shrugged. "Let him. You have authority from the CEO. He doesn't." They finished the inspection, documented the drainage issue, and filed the halt order. By the time Daniel got back to headquarters, his phone had 3 missed calls from the regional manager and an email from Mike's supervisor demanding an explanation. Daniel forwarded everything to Claire with a brief summary of what happened. She responded within 5 minutes. Good call. Let them complain. You're doing your job. The complaints kept coming for the rest of the week. Project managers upset about delays, supervisors angry about additional oversight, regional directors questioning whether Daniel's caution was justified or just disruptive. Claire backed him every time. By Friday, the drainage issue had been reviewed and resolved. Engineering determined that 6-inch pipes were actually sufficient for the application, so the work continued with documentation filed properly. Mike got his project back on schedule, and Daniel learned that sometimes the right call meant pissing people off. That evening, Claire stopped by his office. How was your first week? Exhausting. I've made approximately 20 enemies and questioned every decision I've made. Sounds about right for executive life. She sat in the chair across from his desk. You handled the Harbor Point situation well. Stood your ground, followed procedure, didn't let them bully you into backing off. Mike filed a formal complaint about me. Mike's complained about every safety regulation we've ever implemented. Don't take it personally. She glanced at the Harbor Point plan still spread across his desk. You're working late again, trying to get ahead of next week's inspections. There are 4 projects that need review. Delegate some of it. That's what your team is for. I don't want to dump work on them. It's not dumping. It's managing. Patricia can handle the technical analysis. Sarah can coordinate field visits. Kevin can compile the documentation. You focus on the high-level oversight and decision-making. Daniel knew she was right, but the idea of letting go made him anxious. What if something gets missed? Then you catch it in review. That's how teams work. Nobody does everything themselves. You do. I really don't. I have 15 people working for me, and I trust them to do their job so I can do mine. You need to do the same. She stood, started toward the door, then paused. By the way, board dinner next Friday, 7 p.m. at Morton's. Spouses welcome. But I know you've got your son, so if you need to skip it, no, I'll be there. Jamie can stay with a friend. You sure? These dinners are pretty dull. A lot of corporate politics and fake conversation. I'm part of the executive team now. I should probably show up to these things. Claire smiled slightly. All right. But fair warning, you're going to hate it. She was right. The board dinner was exactly as tedious as promised. 2 hours of forced small talk with people who seemed to care more about being seen than actually connecting. Daniel spent most of it feeling like a fraud, making conversation about projects and budgets while internally wondering what Jamie was doing at Marcus's house. He was standing by the bar, nursing a drink he didn't really want, when Thomas Whitmore approached. You look like you'd rather be anywhere else. That obvious? To me, yes. To them, probably not. Thomas ordered a whiskey, neat. You settling into the new role okay? I think so. Still learning, still making mistakes. Good. The day you stop making mistakes is the day you stop taking risks. Thomas took a sip of his drink. I heard about Harbor Point. You made the right call. Mike Chen doesn't think so. Mike Chen's been coasting on 15 years of experience without ever questioning whether he's actually good at his job. He needed someone to push back. Thomas looked at him directly. You know what I see when I look at you? Someone who doesn't belong at these dinners? Thomas laughed. I see someone who gives a damn. That's rarer than you think in this business. Most people at your level are just trying to climb the ladder, make the right connections, avoid making waves. You're actually trying to do good work. That matters. I'm just trying not to screw up. Same thing, different framing. Thomas finished his drink. Claire tells me you're doing well, that you're picking up the technical side faster than expected, that your team respects you. I'm lucky to have good people working with me. Luck has nothing to do with it. Claire assigned you the best people because she knew you'd listen to them. That's leadership, knowing what you don't know and trusting others to fill the gaps. Before Daniel could respond, Margaret Chen approached, pulling Thomas into a conversation about quarterly projections. Daniel excused himself and found a quiet corner where he could check his phone. Text from Jamie's friend's mom. He's fine. Beat Marcus at Mario Kart 3 times. Want me to keep him for the night? Daniel typed back. No, I'll pick him up around 9. Thanks for watching him. Anytime. He's a good kid. Daniel slipped his phone back in his pocket and looked around the restaurant. Executives in expensive suits, board members discussing mergers and acquisitions, the kind of wealth and power he'd never imagined being part of. And yet here he was. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Claire. Escape plan. Fake emergency. Bail in 10 minutes. Nobody will judge you. Daniel glanced across the room. Claire was trapped in conversation with two board members, looking perfectly professional but clearly bored out of her mind. He typed back, "You offering to cover for me? I'll say your son's school called. Go. Live your life." 10 minutes later, Daniel was in his truck. Not the company SUV, but his old reliable truck that still smelled faintly of construction dust, driving to pick up Jamie. The board dinner faded behind him like a bad dream, and he felt himself relax for the first time all evening. This was real. Jamie's laughter when he answered the door, the story about beating Marcus at video games, the easy comfort of their routine on the drive home. The rest of it, the office, the title, the executive dinners, that was just work. Important work, work that mattered, but still just work. This was his life. And for the first time since accepting the promotion, Daniel felt like maybe he could actually do both. Be the director Whitmore Development needed and the father Jamie deserved. It wouldn't be easy. There would be late nights and difficult decisions and moments when he questioned everything. But he'd figure it out. He always did. 3 months into his new role, Daniel had developed a routine that worked most of the time. Mornings with Jamie, breakfast, backpack checks, the drive to school where his son now asked questions about what buildings his dad was inspecting that day. Days at headquarters or on site, learning to balance technical reviews with the political navigation required at the executive level. Evenings back home, homework and dinner and the precious hour before bed when the rest of the world faded away, and it was just the two of them. It wasn't perfect. Some nights he worked too late, some mornings he was distracted, his mind already running through the day's inspections while Jamie talked about his science project. But they were finding their balance. The Meridian reconstruction was progressing slowly, every modification documented and triple-checked. Daniel visited the site weekly, watching the crews rebuild what should have been done right the first time, feeling the weight of what could have happened if he'd kept quiet. On a cold Tuesday morning in late October, Daniel was reviewing structural plans in his office when Patricia knocked on his door. "We have a problem." He looked up. Patricia's expression was grim, the kind of look she only wore when the numbers didn't add up right. "Which project?" "Meridian. The reconstruction crews found something on level 9. You need to see it." 20 minutes later, Daniel was standing on level 9 of the Meridian Tower, looking at what the reconstruction crew had uncovered. Behind the drywall that had been installed months ago, in a section that hadn't been flagged in the original audit, someone had cut corners even worse than on level 12. The support beams were hollow. Not the engineered hollow beams designed to carry specific loads. These were solid beams that someone had cored out after installation, removing 30% of their mass to reduce weight and save money on foundation reinforcement. Daniel ran his hand along the exposed section, feeling the thinness of the metal, calculating in his head what that meant for load capacity. "How many beams?" he asked. Patricia checked her tablet. "We've identified 6 so far on this level. We're checking the others now, but if they followed the same pattern, we could be looking at compromised support across multiple floors." "Yeah." Daniel pulled out his phone, called Claire. She answered on the first ring. "Tell me it's not bad." "It's worse than bad. Someone hollowed out support beams on level 9. Maybe others. This isn't cutting corners, Claire. This is deliberate fraud." Silence on the other end. Then, "I'm calling an emergency board meeting. Can you be here in an hour?" "I'll be there in 30 minutes. He made it in 25, still wearing his site gear, dust on his boots and probably in his hair. The board was already assembled, faces grave, the atmosphere in the room heavy with the weight of what this meant. Thomas Whitmore looked older than he had 3 months ago. "How bad is it?" Daniel set his tablet on the table, pulled up the photos Patricia had taken. These beams were rated to carry 18,000 pounds each. With 30% of their mass removed, they're carrying maybe 12,000. We've got residential units planned for the floors above this. Furniture, people, normal daily load. We're talking about structural failure waiting to happen. Margaret Chen leaned forward, studying the images. "Who did this?" "We're still investigating, but this level of modification would have required access during construction, knowledge of which beams could be altered without immediate visible failure, and cooperation from multiple people to hide it." "Vance," one of the board members said. "This has his fingerprints all over it." "Richard Vance is already under investigation," Claire said. His cooperation or lack thereof will determine whether this becomes a civil matter or a criminal one. Right now, our priority is determining the scope of the problem and fixing it. The scope could be the entire building, Daniel said. If they did this on level 9, they probably did it elsewhere. We need to halt all reconstruction and do a complete inspection of every beam in the structure. That will add months to the timeline. It'll add years if the building collapses after completion. Thomas ran a hand over his face. Do it. Full inspection. Every beam, every level. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. The meeting devolved into crisis management. Daniel sat through it, answering technical questions when asked, but mostly watching the board grapple with the reality that their flagship project had been sabotaged from within. After the meeting, Claire caught him in the hallway. I need you to lead the inspection personally, not delegate it, not just oversee it. I need you on site, looking at every beam yourself. Claire, that's going to take weeks. I've got 4 other projects that need attention. Delegate them. This is priority 1. If we miss something else, if this building fails, people die, and this company is done. I need someone I trust making sure that doesn't happen. Daniel nodded slowly. I'll need to rearrange some things. Jamie's got school, and I can't just bring him to the site after school. Set up a space where he can do homework. Whatever you need to make this work, make it work. But I need you on this. Okay, yeah, I'll figure it out. That night, Daniel explained the situation to Jamie over dinner. So basically, you have to check a whole building to make sure it's safe? Pretty much. And it's going to take a long time. Few weeks, probably. Jamie chewed thoughtfully on his spaghetti. Can I help? Help how? I don't know. Hand you tools or something. That's what they do in construction, right? Someone hands someone else tools. Daniel smiled despite everything. I think you'd get bored pretty fast, but maybe you can come with me sometimes after school. Do your homework in the site office while I work. Really? I can come to your job? If you promise to stay in the safe areas and not wander off. Jamie's face lit up. I promise. This is going to be so cool. Wait until I tell Marcus. The next 3 weeks were brutal. Daniel arrived at the Meridian site at 7 every morning, methodically inspecting each beam on each level, documenting everything, cross-referencing with original plans and modification records. Patricia and Sarah worked alongside him, setting up testing equipment, running structural analysis, compiling data. They found 11 more compromised beams spread across 6 levels. Each discovery felt like a punch to the gut, proof that the sabotage had been systematic, calculated, and far more extensive than anyone had initially believed. Jamie came to the site 3 afternoons a week, setting up his homework in the site office, occasionally wandering out to watch his dad work. The crew got used to seeing the 7-year-old in an oversized hard hat, asking questions about what everything did. Your kid's pretty smart, Sarah said one afternoon, watching Jamie examine a digital level with intense curiosity. Yeah, he is. He doesn't seem bothered by all the time you're spending on this. I think he likes it, seeing what I do, understanding why it matters. Daniel marked another beam for replacement. Plus, he gets to feel like part of it. That's important to him. On the 4th week, they finally reached the top floor. Daniel stood on level 18, looking out over the city, feeling the exhaustion of the past month settling into his bones. Patricia joined him at the edge, clipboard in hand. Last beam checked. We're done. How many total? 17 compromised beams across 8 levels. Estimated cost to replace everything and reinforce the structure is $22 million. Daniel let out a long breath. $22 million because someone wanted to skim a few $100,000. Greed makes people stupid. Yeah, it does. They filed the final report that evening. Daniel drove home with Jamie, who fell asleep in the passenger seat before they'd gone 3 miles. He carried his son upstairs, put him to bed still in his clothes, and then collapsed on his own bed without bothering to shower off the day's dust. His phone rang at midnight. Claire. Did I wake you? Yeah, but it's fine. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I just got word from the district attorney. They're filing criminal charges against Richard Vance and 2 of his associates. Fraud, criminal negligence, conspiracy. The evidence we provided was enough to build a solid case. Daniel sat up, rubbing his eyes. That's good, right? It's justice. Whether it's good depends on your perspective. She paused. The board voted tonight. We're demolishing the Meridian Tower. What? The damage is too extensive. The cost to properly repair everything, combined with the timeline delay and the reputational hit. It's not financially viable to continue. We're going to tear it down and start over with a new design, new oversight, new everything. Daniel felt something twist in his chest. All that work, all those months, and all that work prevented us from completing a building that would have killed people eventually. That matters more than the money we lost. I know. It's just hard to watch it all come down. Yeah, it is. Claire's voice softened slightly. You did good work, Daniel. The inspection you led, the documentation, that's what gave the DA enough to prosecute. That's what's going to change how we build going forward. You should be proud. After she hung up, Daniel sat in the dark, thinking about the Meridian Tower. About the months of construction, the millions of dollars, the hundreds of people who'd worked on it, all of it coming down because a few people had chosen profit over integrity. But also thinking about the families who wouldn't move into compromised units, the lives that wouldn't be lost when the structure failed under stress, the children who wouldn't lose parents because someone had finally said enough. That was worth more than any building. The demolition began in December. Daniel didn't attend, couldn't bring himself to watch, but he saw the footage later. The Meridian Tower coming down in controlled sections, steel and concrete reduced to rubble, 18 months of work erased in 18 minutes. Jamie watched the video with him that evening. That's the building you were checking? Yeah. It looks scary, the way it falls. Controlled demolition is actually pretty precise. They know exactly how to bring it down safely. Jamie was quiet for a moment. Dad, is this because of what you found? The bad beams? Daniel considered lying, softening the truth, but Jamie deserved honesty. Yeah, buddy, it is. So you saved people by finding the bad parts. I guess I did. That's pretty cool. Jamie leaned against him. Even if it's sad that they have to knock it down. Yeah, even then. The new year brought changes. Whitmore Development announced a complete overhaul of their construction oversight procedures, with Daniel's department given expanded authority and resources. His team grew from 3 people to 8, with field inspectors assigned to every major project and mandatory third-party audits at key construction milestones. The industry noticed. Other development firms started calling, asking about Whitmore's new protocols, wanting to implement similar systems. Daniel found himself invited to speak at construction safety conferences, to consult on best practices, to help other companies avoid the mistakes that had nearly destroyed the Meridian. It was strange, being recognized as an expert, being someone people listened to instead of someone people looked past. In March, the district attorney's office called. They wanted Daniel to testify in the Vance trial. He sat across from the prosecutor in a downtown office, going through the evidence he'd compiled, explaining how the beam modifications had worked, what they'd meant for structural integrity. You'll be our key witness, the prosecutor said, the technical expert who discovered the fraud and can explain it to a jury. When's the trial? June. You'll need to clear your schedule for potentially 2 weeks. Daniel thought about Jamie, about the life they'd built, about how testifying would put him in the spotlight in ways he'd carefully avoided. I'll do it, he said. Whatever you need. The trial was exactly as uncomfortable as Daniel had feared. Days on the witness stand, being questioned and cross-examined, having defense attorneys try to discredit his expertise and paint him as someone with a grudge against Vance. But the evidence spoke for itself. The photos, the measurements, the expert analysis. The pattern of fraud spanning multiple levels and multiple projects beyond just the Meridian. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and came back with guilty verdicts on all counts. Daniel was in the courtroom when the verdict was read. He watched Richard Vance's face, saw the moment the reality settled in, saw a man who'd thought himself untouchable realize he'd been wrong. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded him, shouting questions, asking how it felt to have brought down a corrupt executive, whether he saw himself as a hero. Daniel pushed through them without comment, found his truck, and drove straight to Jamie's school to pick him up early. Why are we leaving? Jamie asked, confused. It's only 1 o'clock. Because I need to spend time with my kid, and the rest can wait. They went to the park, the same one they'd been going to since Jamie was 3. Daniel pushed him on the swings, even though he was probably too old for it now, watched him climb the monkey bars with the same determination he'd had when he was barely tall enough to reach. This was what mattered, not verdicts or vindication or recognition. This. Summer came, and with it, News that the Meridian site had been cleared and new construction would begin in the fall. A different design, a different approach, but built on the foundation, literal and metaphorical, of lessons learned. Claire asked Daniel to lead the oversight for the new project personally. "It should be you," she said. "The building that almost failed became the reason we changed everything. The new Meridian should be your project from the ground up. I don't need that kind of recognition." It's not about recognition. It's about integrity. The new Meridian is going to be the safest building this company has ever constructed because you'll make sure of it. Daniel accepted. On a warm evening in August, almost exactly a year after he'd first found those cracks on level 12, Daniel stood at the cleared Meridian site with Jamie beside him. "This is where it was?" Jamie asked, looking at the empty lot. "This is where it was. And now you get to build it again? But better this time?" "That's the plan." Jamie kicked at the dirt. "I'm glad you found the bad stuff, Dad. Even though it was hard." "Yeah, me too." "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Were you scared when you told them about the problems? When you knew people might get mad at you?" Daniel crouched down to his son's level. "Yeah, buddy, I was terrified." "But you did it anyway." "I did it anyway, because sometimes being scared and doing the right thing have to happen at the same time." Jamie nodded seriously. "Mrs. Peterson says that's called courage." "Mrs. Peterson's pretty smart." They stood there as the sun set, father and son, looking at empty ground that would soon hold something better than what had been there before. Later that evening, after Jamie was asleep, Daniel found himself on the small balcony of their apartment, looking out at the city. His phone buzzed. "Claire." "You busy?" "Just thinking." "About?" "About how different everything is from a year ago, how one decision to speak up changed everything." "It changed everything because you didn't back down when it got hard. A lot of people would have. A lot of people have more sense than me." Claire laughed. "Maybe, or maybe they just have less integrity." She paused. "I've been meaning to tell you something. The board approved my recommendation to make your position permanent with a 5-year contract. They also approved a significant budget increase for your department. Claire, you don't have to. I'm not doing you a favor. You've proven yourself a dozen times over. The company is better because of the work you've done. This is just recognizing that officially. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep holding us to higher standards. Keep being the person who won't let things slide." After they hung up, Daniel sat in the quiet, thinking about the journey that had brought him here. From invisible site supervisor to executive with real authority. From single father barely making rent to someone who could provide stability for his son. From the guy nobody noticed to someone the CEO called at night to talk through decisions. It hadn't been smooth. There had been moments of doubt, times when he'd questioned everything, days when the pressure felt like too much. But he'd figured it out. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but well enough. The following week, Daniel received an unexpected email. It was from Marcus Webb, his old supervisor from the Meridian site. "Hayes, heard about the Vance verdict. Wanted you to know I was wrong about you. You saw what needed to be seen and had the guts to say it. That takes someone special. Good luck with the new Meridian. If you need site supervisors who will actually follow protocol, my number hasn't changed. Webb." Daniel stared at the email for a long time. Marcus had given him grief, had told him to back off, had been part of the culture that enabled the problems in the first place. But people could change, could recognize their mistakes and try to do better. Daniel hit reply. "Webb, appreciate the message. If you're serious about working on the new Meridian, send me your updated resume. We're building something different this time. Could use people who've learned from the past." Hayes. 3 months later, the new Meridian Tower broke ground. Daniel stood at the ceremony, Jamie beside him in a small hard hat that was actually the right size now, watching Claire give a speech about accountability and integrity and building things that would last. When she mentioned Daniel by name, called him up to say a few words, he felt that familiar spike of anxiety. But he walked to the microphone anyway, looked out at the gathered crowd of workers and executives and board members. "A year and a half ago," he said, "I was a site supervisor who found some cracks in concrete. I could have ignored them, filed a report that would get buried, kept my head down and my mouth shut. That would have been easier, safer. He paused, looking at Jamie, who was watching with wide eyes. But I've got a son who's going to grow up in a world full of buildings that people trust to be safe. And I couldn't look at him every night knowing I'd let something dangerous slide because it was convenient. So I spoke up. It cost me some sleep, cost the company some money, cost a lot of people some comfortable illusions about how things worked. He gestured to the empty lot behind him. But it also gave us a chance to build something better. Not just a better building, a better system, better oversight, better accountability, better commitment to doing things right, even when it's hard. That's what the new Meridian represents. Not perfection, but honest effort to learn from mistakes and do better. The applause when he finished was genuine, and Daniel felt something shift inside him. Acceptance. Not of praise or recognition, but of the fact that he belonged here. That his voice mattered. That the invisible man in steel-toed boots had become someone who shaped how things were built. Construction on the new Meridian progressed steadily through the fall and winter. Daniel was on site most days working alongside Patricia and Sarah and a team of inspectors who took their job seriously because they'd seen what happened when people didn't. Jamie came to the site occasionally, still fascinated by the work, asking questions that showed he was actually paying attention to how buildings went up. One Saturday in early spring, as they walked through the nearly completed lobby, Jamie stopped and looked around. "This is a lot better than the old one, isn't it?" "How do you know? You never saw the old one." "I know because you built it right this time." "That makes it better." Simple logic from a kid who trusted that his father knew what mattered. Daniel hoped he'd never lose that trust. The new Meridian Tower opened in June, 2 years after Daniel had first found those cracks. The ceremony was larger this time. More press, more fanfare. Claire gave another speech, but this one was different. This one talked about failure and recovery, about learning from mistakes, about the importance of voices that refuse to be silenced. Daniel stood in the crowd with Jamie, watching the ribbon get cut, watching people flood into a building he knew was safe because he'd verified every beam personally. That night, after Jamie was asleep, Daniel got a call from Thomas Whitmore. "Wanted to congratulate you personally," Thomas said. "The new Meridian is remarkable. Best work this company's done in years." "Thank you, sir. The team did incredible work." The team had incredible leadership. "You know, when Claire first told me she wanted to promote you, I had my doubts. Thought maybe she was being impulsive, making a statement rather than a smart decision. I was wrong. I appreciate that. You changed this company, Daniel, not just the procedures, but the culture. People take safety seriously now because they've seen what happens when they don't. That's your legacy." After they hung up, Daniel sat with that word. Legacy. He'd never thought about legacy before. Had been too busy just trying to get through each day, to provide for his son, to do his job without causing problems. But now, looking back at everything that had happened, he could see the thread connecting it all. One decision to speak up had cascaded into changes that would affect every building Whitmore Development touched for years to come. That mattered. Not because it made him important or special, but because it meant the work he did protected people who'd never know his name. Families moving into safe buildings. Workers constructing projects with proper oversight. A company that valued integrity over expedience. That was legacy enough. The years that followed brought their own challenges. Projects that needed his intervention, companies that wanted to hire him away, offers of positions that would have meant more money and prestige, but also more compromise. Daniel turned them all down. He stayed at Whitmore Development, stayed in his role as Director of Construction Safety and Integrity, stayed focused on the work that mattered. His team grew, his influence expanded, but he never lost sight of why he was there. Jamie grew too, from a 7-year-old who needed help with homework to a teenager who could hold his own in discussions about structural engineering. He didn't want to go into construction. His interests lay in environmental science, but he understood why his father's work mattered. On Jamie's 16th birthday, they drove past the Meridian Tower together. "You know what's weird?" Jamie said, looking up at the building. "I barely remember you working on this. I was so young." "Yeah, you were 7. Seemed like such a big kid then." "Did you know when you first found the problems? Did you know it would change everything?" Daniel thought about that moment on level 12, finding those cracks, making the choice to document them instead of ignoring them. "No," he said honestly. "I just knew I couldn't stay quiet and live with myself." That's kind of what courage is, though, right? Not knowing how it'll turn out, but doing it anyway. When'd you get so philosophical? I learned from the best. They drove on, father and son, past the building that had changed their lives toward whatever came next. Because that was the thing about doing the right thing when it was hard. You didn't do it for recognition or reward. You did it because staying silent meant carrying weight you weren't willing to bear. Daniel had chosen to speak, and that choice had rippled outward in ways he couldn't have predicted. Had cost him sleep and security and the comfortable invisibility he'd relied on for years. But it had also given him something invaluable. The knowledge that when it mattered most, when the easy path and the right path diverged, he'd chosen right. That was the lesson he hoped Jamie would carry forward. That integrity wasn't about being perfect or fearless. It was about doing what needed to be done even when you were terrified, even when the cost was high, even when nobody would have blamed you for staying quiet. Because in the end, the person you had to face every morning wasn't your boss or your board, or the people judging your decisions. It was yourself. And Daniel Hayes, former invisible man in steel-toed boots, current director with real authority, and a son he'd do anything to protect, could face himself just fine. That was enough. That was everything.